Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. The Military Program of the Proletarian Revolution, written September 1916, Chapter 2. To this must be added the following general consideration. An oppressed class which does not strive to learn to use arms, to acquire arms, only deserves to be treated like slaves. We cannot, unless we have become bourgeois pacifists or opportunists, forget that we are living in a class society from which there is no way out, nor can there be, save through the class struggle. In every class society, whether based on slavery, serfdom, or, as at present, wage labor, the oppressor class is always armed. Not only the modern standing army, but even the modern militia, and even in the most democratic bourgeois republics, Switzerland, for instance, represent the bourgeoisie armed against the proletariat. That is such an elementary truth that it is hardly necessary to dwell upon it. Suffice it to point to the use of troops against strikers in all capitalist countries. A bourgeoisie armed against the proletariat is one of the biggest fundamental and cardinal facts of modern capitalist society. And in face of this fact, revolutionary social democrats are urged to demand disarmament. That is tantamount of complete abandonment of the class struggle point of view, to renunciation of all thought of revolution. Our slogan must be, arming of the proletariat to defeat, expropriate and disarm the bourgeoisie. These are the only tactics possible for a revolutionary class, tactics that follow logically from, and are dictated by, the whole objective development of capitalist militarism. Only after the proletariat has disarmed the bourgeoisie will it be able, without betraying its world historic mission, to consign all armaments to the scrap heap. And the proletariat will undoubtedly do this, but only when this condition has been fulfilled, certainly not before. If the present war rouses among the reactionary Christian socialists, among the whimpering petty bourgeoisie, only horror and fright, only aversion to all use of arms, to bloodshed, death, etc., then we must say, capitalist society is and has always been horror without end. If this most reactionary of all wars is now preparing for that society an end to horror, we have no reason to fall into despair. But the disarmament demand, or more correctly, the dream of disarmament, is, objectively, nothing but an expression of despair at a time when, as everyone can see, the bourgeoisie itself is paving the way for the only legitimate and revolutionary war, civil war against the imperialist bourgeoisie. A lifeless theory, some might say, but we would remind them of two world historical facts, the role of the trusts and the employment of women in industry, on the one hand, and the Paris Commune of 1871 and the December 1905 uprising in Russia, on the other. The bourgeoisie makes it its business to promote trusts, drive women and children into the factories, subject them to corruption and suffering, condemn them to extreme poverty. We do not demand such development, we do not support it. We fight it. But how do we fight? We explain that trusts and the employment of women in industry are progressive. We do not want to return to the handicraft system, pre-monopoly capitalism, domestic drudgery for women. Forward through the trusts, etc., and beyond them to socialism. With the necessary changes that arguments is applicable also to the present militarization of the population. Today the imperialist bourgeoisie militarizes the youth as well as the adults, tomorrow, it may begin militarizing the women. Our attitude should be, all the better. Full speed ahead. For the faster we move, the nearer shall we be to the armed uprising against capitalism. How can social democrats give way to fear of the militarization of the youth, etc., if they have not forgotten the example of the Paris Commune? This is not a lifeless theory or a dream. It is a fact. And it will be a sorry state of affairs indeed if, all the economic and political facts notwithstanding, social democrats began to doubt that the imperialist era and imperialist wars must inevitably bring about a repetition of such facts. A certain bourgeois observer of the Paris Commune, writing to an English newspaper in May 1871, said, "If the French nation consisted entirely of women, what a terrible nation it would be. Women and teenage children fought in the Paris Commune side by side with the men. It will be no different in the coming battles for the overthrow of the bourgeoisie. Proletarian women will not look on passively as poorly armed or unarmed workers are shot down by the well-armed forces of the bourgeoisie. They will take to arms, as they did in 1871, and from the cowed nations of today, or more correctly, from the present-day labor movement, disorganized more by the opportunists than by the governments, There will undoubtedly arise, sooner or later, but with absolute certainty, an international league of the terrible nations of the revolutionary proletariat. The whole of social life is now being militarized. Imperialism is a fierce struggle of the great powers for the division and redivision of the world. It is therefore bound to lead to further militarization in all countries, even in neutral and small ones. How will proletarian women oppose this? Only by cursing all war and everything military, only by demanding disarmament. The women of an oppressed and really revolutionary class will never accept that shameful role. They will say to their sons, "You will soon be grown up. You will be given a gun. Take it and learn the military art properly." The proletarians need this knowledge not to shoot your brothers, the workers of other countries, as is being done in the present war, and as the traitors to socialism are telling you to do. They need it to fight the bourgeoisie of their own country, to put an end to exploitation, poverty and war, and not by pious wishes, but by defeating and disarming the bourgeoisie. If we are to shun such propaganda, precisely such propaganda, in connection with the present war, then we had better stop using fine words about international revolutionary social democracy, the socialist revolution and war against war,